everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Amy, and this week I made some braided bread with a tasty historical dish on the side. I also have a little glimpse of the garden coming up in all its southwest summer over 100 degrees glory, so stay tuned for that because it's way better than I was expecting at this time of year. But first, the star of the show. This bread is super tasty to make, but does take a few minutes to put together. The ingredients are very simple though, so let's get started. Step 1 is to activate the yeast. In a cup, measure 450 milliliters of water, which is just under 2 cups. And this should be about 108 Fahrenheit to activate the yeast. Add 1 tablespoon of honey and 3 teaspoons of active dry yeast, and stir this up well so everything gets all melted together. Honey that is crystallized, it really doesn't matter for this recipe since the water will just melt it down. Set this aside in a warm place to activate, which should only take about 5 to 10 minutes at most. While the yeast is activating, we need to take a half stick or a quarter cup of very cold butter and either shred it up or dice it up. I've found that shredding it makes it easier to rub into the dough since it's going in the bowl in very small pieces and incorporates quicker than the diced chunks. I threw mine back in the fridge so it stays nice and cold. Lastly, in a large bowl, weigh out 750 grams of bread flour, which is just a little under 6 1/4 cups if you don't have a scale. You can use all-purpose flour as well if you don't have bread flour. The only difference is that the final product may be a little less elastic and airy, but the bread will still be really good. Add 2 teaspoons of salt to the flour and stir all that dry stuff together. Now we grab our butter and we're going to add that to the flour mixture and rub in the cold butter until everything is sort of sand-like. The butter will try to clump up as it warms up, so I made sure to break apart anything that tried to clump together. The end result? Well, it really doesn't look much different from the beginning, but as long as the butter is incorporated and nothing is in large clumps, then everything's good. Next, we make a well in the middle, and we're going to pour in the yeast mixture, which should be nice and foamy like this. If you do try this recipe and the yeast does not get fizzy, then it's possible that the yeast is not activating, and I would recommend getting some new yeast so the bread rises. I started mixing this with a bread whisk, and I mixed this up until the water was mostly incorporated, and then switched to using clean hands to keep bringing the dough together. In the bowl, I just worked with the dough until it becomes a shaggy sort of lump and then moved to a clean surface. Some of that flour just wanted to stay hanging out in the bottom, so I made sure to get absolutely everything incorporated with nothing remaining in the bottom of the bowl. I floured the surface, not too heavily, but enough to keep the dough from sticking, and dumped out my ultra shaggy dough. Any flour I put on the counter will end up incorporated into the dough, and I don't want to add a bunch more flour because the more flour I add, the more dense and tough the bread will be. This is where I got my workout for the day. This is kneaded for 10 minutes. I know, right? 10 minutes. Anyway, it's a lot, but this dough is actually really soft, so it isn't a terribly exhausting 10 minutes. It'll be tacky and even a little sticky to start, but as the dough starts to form a nice puffy ball, it becomes less and less sticky. It will also eat up the flour on the counter, but avoid putting more down since by the time the original flour is gone, the dough should not be tacky enough to stick anymore and it should be rolling around pretty smoothly. At the end of the 10-minute timer, the dough should hold together in a soft ball and it will only be a little bit tacky. Drop the ball back into the big bowl, cover it with a clean towel, and throw this to the side to proof in a warm spot for about an hour or until it has doubled in size. When the dough has doubled up, punch it back down, and now it is time to braid it. Turn the dough onto a clean surface. There's no need for any more flour at this point. The dough should not stick. My kitchen was probably about 70 to 72 on this day, and this amount of proofing was only just over an hour. So I would recommend keeping an eye on this and not letting it go too long unless your kitchen is pretty cool. The dough may stick to the bowl a little, but I didn't have any issues with it sticking to the counter once I had it out of the bowl. And you can see here on the cutting board, it is not sticking at all. Cut the dough into 2 halves and put 1 half to the side. Now, cut that first half into 3 pieces, roughly equal, but they don't have to be exact. Using your hands, roll each of these into a thin strip. This cutting board I'm using is 24 inches long, so I think I rolled these into about 22 inches each. The dough should be nice and pliable and should not rip or tear, but I was still relatively gentle and avoided pulling on it too much. I stuck with mostly rolling it on the surface until it was a good length. When all 3 are ready, lay them out side by side and press the tops back together. Then braid the strips as you see here in a simple 3-piece braid. You do want to make sure not to leave air pockets in between the strands because that will result in air pockets in the final baked product. But you also don't want to wind these together so tight that they stretch out more and become really thin either. You can see here, I'm just making sure they're directly in contact with each other, but not pulling on them much or crushing them. Roll each end under so they don't try to come apart during baking. Then just cut up and braid the second half the same way. Lay each braid on a parchment-lined baking sheet. Here's a quick glimpse of how they look now. At this point, they will rest on this sheet for another hour or again until they have risen to about double size. This is the point where it's time to preheat the oven to 410 Fahrenheit as well, or 210 Celsius. This next part is optional. To make the tops of the crust nice and shiny and golden, I brushed on an egg wash. All I did was crack 1 egg and mix it up with the brush. No water or milk is needed, just the egg, and then brush it on the bread before it goes into the oven. I made sure not to be too rough with the bread because I really don't want it to deflate at this point. Then into the oven it went for 25 minutes, or until the top is nice and golden and the bottom sounds hollow when I tap on it. These just look beautiful coming out of the oven, don't they? You'll want to put these on a wire rack to cool, and then they're ready to eat. As you can see, these are not really large enough for sandwiches, and are meant more for something like dipping in a sauce or a dip, topped with prosciutto and olive oil, or sliced up for a charcuterie board. It is very soft with a nice thin crust, and has a soft, subtle flavor that doesn't interfere with whatever you want to serve with it. For me, I decided to go back to my childhood. When I was a kid, my grandma would make this, and it was always one of my absolute favorite things. Stouffer's calls it creamed chipped beef. My grandma called it chipped beef on toast, but my grandpa, who served in the Navy in World War II, called it S.O.S. And for the longest time, I had no idea just how easy this is to make or how few ingredients it has. It starts with the main ingredient, chipped beef, which is thinly sliced beef that is salted and dried. I took 1 bottle, which is 2.25 ounces, and roughly chopped it up since I don't want gigantic pieces of beef in this. The pieces don't even have to be the same size, since this beef is so thin that it all cooks in minutes anyway, regardless of the size, so the absolute roughest of rough chops will be perfect. Next, I added a 1/4 cup of butter to a saucepan, or half a stick, and let that get nice and bubbly. I sprinkled in a 1/4 cup of flour and stirred this constantly so the flour doesn't burn. For this, I'm just cooking out the raw flour taste, which only takes about a minute at most. Next, I added 2 cups of milk, but in small quantities at a time, while I stirred constantly to keep anything from getting lumpy. This is just a basic roux, really. At the beginning, it will get really lumpy every time you pour in more milk, but it will get creamier and smoother as you keep adding the milk and just keep stirring. At the end, it should look like a thin gravy, but trust me, this will thicken up like crazy. When all the milk is incorporated, I dumped in the chipped beef, stirred it around to make sure it all separated and was not sticking together in stacks. Next is pepper, which is the only seasoning in this. This absolutely does not need any more salt than what is already in that beef. The recipe I use says 1/8 of a teaspoon of pepper, but it can be to taste if you like more or less of the black pepper flavor. Now, I just bring this back to a boil using medium heat and let it bubble for 5 minutes. Although, make sure to stir this very often because the milk will scorch and stick to the bottom if it just sits. You'll also see it getting noticeably thicker as it bubbles. After 5 minutes, remove it from the heat and it is ready. All in all, this took about 15 minutes to make, from cutting up the beef to eating. The traditional way to eat this is to toast up sandwich bread and spoon this over top. But I have this lovely braided bread, so I just put some chipped beef in a bowl, toasted up the braided bread, and used it like a dip. This is extremely, almost ridiculously filling. I could not eat more than a quarter of this at a time. Usually serving sizes are taken kind of with a grain of salt, but this really is 4 servings simply because it is just so filling. But this was like going back in time for me. I will definitely be making this more often since now I know it is so simple to make and it's actually extremely tasty. We of course did what we always do, which is use something up to make pizza. Like most homemade breads, this doesn't last very long. So when this became day-old bread, we used it to make a sort of French bread pizza type thing. Pretty simple, we just sliced it in half long ways, and then added our sauce, cheese, toppings of choice. I am a pepperoni person, but my husband likes a bit more. Canned mushrooms work great for pizzas, so we always keep some in the pantry, and then some crumbled bacon. We cooked these in our toaster oven until the cheese was browned and they were nice and melty. A little Parmesan, and they were fabulous. A great way to use up day-old bread so it doesn't go stale. And now, here is a quick look at the garden. This is also a little twilight stroll in the garden because it is almost painfully bright out here during the day. Nothing is putting on any fruit because it's been over 100 degrees, and right now everything is just in don't die mode. We have a 40% shade sale, and make sure to keep everything watered daily. It's still really green out here and lovely to look at. So far, not many plant casualties beside the beans and peas you saw in previous videos, so I am considering this a success so far. Hopefully, we will get some vegetables when monsoon season starts and the temps start to go down a little. Oh, and the garden proves me wrong. Look at that, I have a few peppers coming in. How cool is that? Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with me this week. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. It really helps out my channel. Leave a comment if you try any of these recipes and let me know what you think. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you back in my kitchen next week. Bye!